we're going to do a panel on tooling. So basically, asking some questions about what kind of middleware or what kind of tools we could create or we need to create to facilitate building on Bitcoin. To me, I mean, it's a very important topic, I think, because some other well-known blockchains would have some much better tools, and that's one of the reasons why they gather a lot of newer developers. I'm thinking about Ethereum right now, which has like a lot of very simple tools, and that's why the new people who right now are looking for like, hey, where do I start coding on blockchain stuff are going to Ethereum. And I really don't think that should be the case. We can probably work more on building the right tools to onboard new people. And yeah, so that's kind of the topic of this panel. It's pretty much improvised. So I just noticed, I notified the guys like this morning or yesterday, some of them this morning, and they're all right joining. So great stuff. And I'm going to open the questions to the floor. So if you have any questions, just raise your hand. The guys will be there to let you ask your questions. The panel will be about 20 minutes long, and after that we're gonna go for food. So yeah. Yeah. Okay, so let's do this. I'm just going to start by asking you, who you are, what you're doing, what you're working on, especially on the tooling side of things, because I think most people here know you for all the things, and it could be good to give them a reminder of what else you're working on and how building on Bitcoin is relevant to you.
Cool. Shall I start?
Yeah.
Okay, my name is Nahum. I work for Blockstream, and what I do there is work mostly on green rest, but I also work on lower level libraries like libwally and anything related to wallets or tooling for wallets.
So I'm Nicolas Dorier. I'm working on a library that is called NBitcoin. Also wrote the first version of programming programming Bitcoin in C#. That is now open source, has been widely changed by the community, and especially thanks to Adam that talked earlier, and also the developer of BTC Pay.
I'm Eric Voskuil. I worked about last 4.5 years full-time on Bitcoin, C++, developer toolkit for Bitcoin. It's also the oldest full node implementation, apart from Satoshi's code.
Okay, all right. So I think one of the first question I would have is actually related to that. So what do you guys think about like different implementation from Bitcoin Core? So I know you have a pretty strong opinion about creating other tools, and I'm perfectly all right with that. I just want to know if the other guys are open to like other full implementations, and you think it's a risk to separate implementations. So Eric, if you want to start.
I don't really have strong opinions about it. I just, it's an inevitability. It's kind of, to me, a moot point. There's always going to be whatever code people want to run. There's many versions of Bitcoin Core, even within its own distribution. So to me, it's not really an interesting question. I mean, it's a good question, but it's going to happen. So,
all right, I can take it. It's all right.
It's no bad question. No. So it's. I mean, there's certain things people want to do, and they want to, they're going to do it.
Eric is right. I mean, even the same exact version on two different platforms, like some version of Core had an issue with 32 bits versus 64 bits on Linux, and that caused some consensus failure. In general, you can have a consensus failure even within the same software or different versions of the same software. But when you re-implement it entirely, then you're increasing the risk, right? Because not only you have to implement all the rules, but you also have to implement all the bugs. And I'm sure they squashed all the ones that they know about, but then there's the ones that we don't know about yet. And so there's always a risk there. And then, many years ago I thought, okay, maybe I'll run all of them, and then I choose between any of them, what the various full node implementation decide, then if the majority agrees on something, I'll follow that. But that, it's also not necessarily good, because it's not about me, it's also about what the rest of the network does and what the majority of people are going to do when there's a consensus failure. And I'm not talking about, different tribes or different groups of people deciding what is, the future of the tech. I'm talking mostly about, simple bugs, that sort of thing.
Yeah, technical failure.
Technical failure,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
On my side, I tried at the beginning to code. When I first discovered Bitcoin, the way I did it was by coding in Bitcoin and like finding piece of code here and there, tried to put it into a coherent library. It was most to learn about Bitcoin, I did that. And so after I got the great idea of doing the full node myself, while I was trying to build Bitcoin, to learn about Bitcoin. And while I learned many things, one thing I learned is that the code was too complex to do it all by myself at this time. So I stopped doing this, but later I did it again because like there was an altcoin community that is called Stratis that came to me and said, oh, we want a full node in C#, and I explained quite clearly, I think it's dangerous in the sense that indeed if there is a consensus failure, you need to know that some people are risking money on this, and there will be consensus failure. There is no way my implementation with the implementation of Bitcoin Core are 100% exact. So the question is what will happen when it goes. And basically their reply was like, well, for Bitcoin it's okay, but for our altcoin, it's we might use it. And on my side, I don't like to code for altcoin, so I said I will do it in Bitcoin and then do whatever you want to adapt it in, your altcoin. So I did it anyway. I think maybe for altcoin it's a good idea because like the C++ code is hard to maintain and there is very few engineers. But on Bitcoin, on my side, I would be scared to run anything else than Bitcoin Core in production.
Yeah, I think I kind of agree with this idea, but then you also have like tools that serve a different purpose, or at least are better fit for different things. So yeah, on this side, I guess, would you guys have any like tools that you would recommend, or something maybe that you believe most of the people in this room are not aware of?
Okay, so
yeah.
So it's a pretty interesting question actually, because I think that most of the tooling that are built for Bitcoin right now, it's absolutely bad. And I say everything like Bitcoin Core RPC is very bad. Electrum, I think it's very bad protocol as well. It's not easy to use. Everything has been done before, for example, HD Wallet existed. And then HD Wallet came and we tried to use the same protocol that existed before and try, to retrofit it. And I think it made all this protocol not adapted to what modern Bitcoin development should be. So on my side, for example, why developing BTC Pay server, I decided to not use any block explorer that was existing. So I don't want public block explorer for privacy reasons. And I didn't want Electrum because it was not adapted for HD wallets. So I built my own that is also open source, that is called NB Explorer. And I'm working on that, and it's very simple API. So I don't know if many users use it, but right now I'm using my own tools as block explorer for things that Bitcoin Core don't do. I think Bitcoin Core should stay focused on being a full node, not doing too much RPC stuff. It will never fit everybody's use case, I think.
Okay. Any tools you have in mind or something to recommend?
Yeah, I'll do that. But first I wanted to continue what he said and say that I agree. Ideally, the wallet was separated from the rest so that people could decide, I'm talking about Bitcoin Core, separating the wallet from everything else. Yeah, so one thing that not many know about is a library that we've been working on for a couple of years now. It's called libwally. And the idea was that we couldn't find a library that did what we wanted, that was compatible on Android, iOS, Windows, Mac, Linux, and potentially embedded as well, like HSMs or that sort of thing. There were some things around, but they weren't complete, and there were maybe some things that we didn't like. And so, rather than rather than contributing to those, we decided to basically start from scratch, from on top of libsecp, and just build on top. Not everything, like AES and a few other things were taken from other CCAN, like basically a C. It's all written in C, and yeah, it uses the CCAN repositories, which contribute, SHA and AES and a few other things. It has support for BIP32, BIP39, BIP38, and recently we added transaction construction to it. The idea is to support Bitcoin and potentially, as a compile time option, Liquid as well. And so yeah, this library we use already in mobile wallets and on the backend, and I've been testing it on small hardware gadgets. This specifically is based on a chip called ESP32, but it should be able to run on any cheap ARM, Cortex, or these sort of chips. So yeah, it's a small Bitcoin library. It doesn't do any networking. It doesn't do any file system. It doesn't do any caching. It doesn't do it's basically just the crypto primitives plus some bips built on top.
Okay, how do you actually relay the transactions then from there? You're doing just the derivation, or?
Well, so it really depends on what kind of wallet we're talking about. If we're talking about green address, it's a client-server model, so the transaction is signed client-side and then the server broadcasts it. But the client could also broadcast it through SPV or through the BIP70 protocol. The transaction is also passed to the merchant, so the merchant can also broadcast it.
Okay, cool. Eric, do you have any tools? Well,
yeah, I mean,
Bitcoin obviously, but yeah.
My knowledge of tools is limited to the tools that I write, or that we write. I can't give a very objective analysis of everything that's out there, but I can describe what we have. So LibBitcoin is a toolkit primarily, but it's also applications built on the toolkit, including full node, server, client stack, administrator, command line tools, et cetera. So to me, that's really important. If you're going to build a toolkit for other developers or for people to write against your APIs, you have to do it yourself. You have to have at least one implementation that makes use of the API, preferably two. So LibBitcoin is 10 different libraries, actual independent repos in GitHub, plus an 11th, which is a build system library. So we put a heavy emphasis on automation, build, test, continuous integration, code generation, because it's an awful lot to maintain otherwise, and it was unbearable for a while. There's about 500,000 lines of code. So the system repo is very similar to what you described, or it's the crypto stack, primitives, BIP 38, 39, 32, a whole bunch. I can't even remember them all. So if you want to build basic Bitcoin stuff from the ground up, you start there. But there's a P2P network library, so you can build on top of that and do Bitcoin protocol stuff. There's a database, which is completely hand-rolled, memory-mapped files, very efficient. On top of that, there's another library, which is the Bitcoin blockchain, which maintains the chain. There's a node library, which basically combines network and blockchain on top of database and system to build a full node. But full node's useless unless you can communicate with it, right?
Do you build this only on Unix or also on Windows and potentially
We do continuous
mobile?
integration on OS X, Linux, and Windows. Visual Studio builds on Windows. Pretty soon we'll have the Auto Tools builds as well.
And you think some of these tools would be useful on mobile as well? Like could be reused there?
It's C++, it's a little heavier than C, but you get the advantage of more robust error handling and stuff like that, asynchrony. So yeah, I mean it's designed. One of the reasons why I didn't start the library. The libraries were started by Amir Taki. He had his own specific use cases and scenarios, but the reason, I went around the same process, like, what do I want to work on? Well, how do I learn Bitcoin and stuff? And I just decided it really had, if I was going to work on it, it had to be C++, even though, I hadn't worked in C++ in years. But because of these questions, like, if I want to get as close to the metal as I can, but still be productive and be usable by the biggest part of the community, it really had to be C++. And not sit on some proprietary, environment or anything like that. So it kind of depends on what type of small device you're talking about, but there's there's been implementations of various things that have been built for mobile on it. It's not a problem. I know people have compiled it, for Raspberry Pis and things like that.
I mean, yeah, I compiled Bitcoin Core for Android.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. It's hard to determine like what's the bar, but embedded, I don't know, like it depends on your scenario, I guess. I don't see why not. The devices keep getting more capable, and the code kind of stays the same. So as the devices get more capable, a good example is we kind of made a decision at one point. Amir made a decision to kind of not care about hard drives, just optimize for SSD, because why bother? The technology was advancing, and this was years ago. But we get to the point where we kind of production quality, and now it's okay. There's a number of, in terms of the node, the database, and blockchain implementation, there's a number of design decisions that are oriented around kind of designing for the most reasonable scenario, not optimizing for everything, and that was one of them. So on top of that other stuff is a server stack, which is client-server communication, which gives us the API, right? So we have a proprietary API, which allows us to talk to the node. So from that, you can communicate with your node in a high-performance, low overhead manner, and have wallets, et cetera.
Yeah, from what I hear, it's like for each scenario, you guys need to build a new tool because there is no tool like one size fits all. Is that kind of what you're saying? Because none of you were finding the right tool, so you had to build your own. But what if everybody in the room start doing the same thing? Then it's just going to be a mess, isn't it?
No, because by then there will be the tools, right? I mean, the point is, when I started, there was no library that worked on embedded, on Android, on iOS that did what we needed. And now there is one. And if there was one, I wouldn't have. I don't like to reinvent the wheel.
And then back to like the derivation paths and stuff. It's always like a big question, or at least nobody agrees on. What should we do? Should we have a standard? Should we just be retrocompatible with everything? Should we just?
I think this space moves too fast to have standards, and inevitably wallets will have different things on top. Like they will advance, right? They will offer something advanced or something slightly different. Call it CSV or whatever it is. And ultimately, if they start doing that, they'll deviate and they won't be compatible. So either everyone is very strict and follows every single, even with BIP44, some wallets support sub-accounts, some wallets don't. So if you use a wallet that has sub-account support and then you try to recover your funds on another wallet, you may not get the sub-accounts. You may get only, the first level of derivation, and that's bad, right? You lost money.
I don't know if anybody in the room has some questions that they're like, oh yeah, go ahead.
I noticed an interesting thing that came since the first time. So I came in Bitcoin in 2014, but before that I heard that in Bitcoin Core Qt there was basically everything inside the tool, even like, was it a betting, I don't remember. Poker?
I heard of something like that.
So there was a strange thing like this, like everything inside one single binary. And as the time goes forward, what we are seeing is that, and the industry mature, is that slowly things get decoupled from Bitcoin Core. And my hope, so also I came from Windows background. In Windows in general, we have one big tool that does everything. And recently I moved more on Linux stuff. So I learned about the Linux way as well. And in general, in Linux, there is lots of small tools that do the right thing, and then you just pipe them together, and it gives you the result. And I think that it's how Bitcoin is moving forward. Before it was one big block, big binary. By the way, Bitcoin was first developed for Windows, so I guess it maybe come from this route. But then as time passes, we have this explosion of tools that is coming, and we are just piping, at the end of the day, it will be just piping them together the right way. And I hope that Bitcoin Core will just focus on, making sure validating the blockchain and nothing else. Yeah.
And the question on standards, standards evolve organically because they're necessary. You can't, it just wouldn't be economically reasonable for everybody to develop their own toolkit and develop their own software on it, right? So for example, we've focused some effort more recently on Electrum because it's a de facto standard in many ways for wallet, client, and server communication. And this happened as the internet evolved, right? I mean, there were some standards bodies, there were some standards that were important enough for people to sit down and talk about. They were never uniformly implemented, they still aren't, but it's a starting point. But people move beyond that really quickly and then come back later and rationalize the things that have survived. And that's what's happening in Bitcoin. And things are being, like you said, Nick, they're being factored out, right? There's way too much in a blob. And it's not just Bitcoin Core, it's just everything's kind of been designed around that model, right? So it's one of the things we've done, right? We split this up and we're going to continue to do that because there's just too much in one place. Mining, for example, I mean, there's just, lots of these pieces.
Even, for example, so it will be back in my talk, but for example, in my talk, preview of this is I'm talking like, for example, wallets. I think right now are doing way too much. I think wallets should be like focused on making a nice UI, then talking to a trusted server that you own. Basically, what Jonas was suggesting, like if you have a nice way to have your own server with your own Bitcoin node and Explorer that you control, and then you can use your mobile device to connect directly to it. Then yeah, wait, what was the question already? I lost my way.
So that's preferable, but I don't think it has to be optional, right? Not everyone is going to do it.
Yeah, I know. So for the wallet case, like I think they will need to have also this decoupling, like the wallet doing just the UI and just like having the hard part run on other tools on the server somewhere. I think it's easier in the long term.
Okay, do we have questions?
Hello. I wanted to ask more about smart contracts that could be as an off-chain solution, like Lightning Network, like second layer. I'm in real estate business, and I was thinking a lot about having some kind of register, property register or whatever, as an off-chain solution with probably third party, double checking, double verifying, but with being able to make the transactions on Bitcoin blockchain. So whatever is arranged through smart contract off-chain gets connected to the specific payment somehow. Is there any solution, or are we moving towards these kind of solutions? Is it, any one of you is working on this? Or
I think we need you to clarify what you mean by smart
I didn't
contract
get the question.
in that way. So do you want the execution to be done by like a script on the blockchain, or do you think it's just about the record?
No, I don't actually. I mean, I don't see it hard-coded in blockchain. I don't think it's a good idea what Ethereum did actually. That's why I'm thinking about some kind of an off-chain solution where people open channels, for example, making smart contracts work, and then the final payment transaction for concluding the deal, for example, goes into blockchain and gets connected to that smart contracts that people decided to open and conclude. So I mean, maybe there is nothing like that yet. But
so in Bitcoin world, there is one big difference with Ethereum is that when you say smart contract in an Ethereum mine, for example, you think that you refer in general to a tool that can do everything. And in Bitcoin, actually, we have like one app per smart contract in reality. Like for example, Lightning rely on smart contracts, but you have one app that does only this.
Yeah.
One contract, one app.
Yeah, you see what I'm talking about, storing some information about the deal, as like your security key. I mean, only you can see, and the other party that was involved can see, and maybe some third party, some business, maybe even competing businesses, several businesses. Because I'm a convinced crypto anarchist. I don't view government being involved into this. So that's why I'm probably
from a tooling standpoint.
Yeah.
I think in the context of the panel here, speaking for myself, I don't work on anything that's not in widespread use. So in other words, somebody has to advance some technology, some capability to the point where people are using it, and maybe there's one or two, two or three implementations, and then all of a sudden, hey, we can build an API for that. We can build tooling for that. People can use that more reliably, more reproducibly. So even Lightning, to me, is premature. I've got plenty of work to do on just Bitcoin, right?
Yeah,
but Lightning has to sit on top of Bitcoin. You can't have Lightning without a Bitcoin
Exactly.
node, right?
Yeah.
So you still have to get that right. So the tooling stack tends to lag what's actually happening out there. And what you're describing isn't actually happening very commonly on Bitcoin right now, at least not from my perspective. I know Lightning is a great example of something that's coming, but
So we'll probably move from Lightning towards something, similar
the
to what
stuff-
I'm trying to describe, because it's
yeah, the
pretty
stuff you're talking about, people talk about and they do these kinds of crazy things in Ethereum, right? But in the Bitcoin world, smart contracts, kind of boils down to there's this one contract type and it does Lightning, and then there's a couple of other contracts that people have done. And from a tooling standpoint, I mean, have you worked on anything?
Yeah,
specific
the same
to
thing
that?
happened with multi-sig P2SH at the beginning. Most
Exactly.
wallets didn't support them. Some even tried to convert them back to, pay to public key hash addresses, which was really weird because you will lose all the money.
Yeah. So when people find good ways to do things, the tools will come out to make it easier and more standard, and the standards will kind of evolve around that.
Thank you.
We also have a talk on scripting and Mast this afternoon, so probably more insight as well for what you're thinking about.
A question broadly, I think, for Nicolas. You said you wouldn't trust an alternative implementation. So first question, would you have expected to have seen more consensus failures with some of the major alternative implementations? And two, would you advise against Lightning implementations that rely on some of the major alternative implementations of Bitcoin?
Not sure.
Okay, so just to clarify, you're talking about technical consensus failure between different implementations or different tools? Implementations, okay. Anybody want to talk about that?
Well, there's a couple of differences depending whether you're just an end user or a merchant or a miner, right? The risks are different, I think, there. And you can also always try to run one of these third-party implementations behind the full node, behind the Bitcoin Core full node, in which case you're only exposed to some of the risks, not all of them. In general, I would advise against it. Until we have a consensus library that can be reused by another stack, I would advise against it.
You do have that. I mean, technically, there's the lib consensus, but it only applies to script rules.
It's not enough yet. That's all I'm saying.
Well, yeah, but taking out the other rules basically means you're making a full node because the rules are the node. I mean, it's kind of hard to imagine getting there. We put a library around lib consensus. The Bitcoin consensus is a thin wrapper around that makes it usable in the rest of our system. So people can use that with libitcoin, so at least all of the script rules are being validated using the exact same code, at least the same source. I mean,
do you know if the other full node implementations also use libconsensus or they don't?
Jorge, you here?
Any other full node implementation
Jorge
in the
would know.
room?
I don't know.
There's one in JavaScript. Bitcoin J used to have a full node variant.
Yeah, I'm assuming it's.
There's one in Go.
I don't know of anybody that's using lib consensus except for us. We make it optional because we have a full implementation of the script rules as well. You can conditionally activate the other ones, but I don't know.
So on my case, when I developed it, it was configurable. Basically, you could say, okay, you can use the script evaluator that I did in Bitcoin, or use libconsensus.
Oh, you did. Okay.
I don't know if it's still again the case, but yeah, it was how I did. Or there was a case where you skip the script validation in the case where you are behind already Bitcoin Core. So if you're already receiving all the transaction and block from a trusted Bitcoin node, you don't have to run the scripts basically. So it was configurable.
Okay.
Skip validation.
Yeah.
Francis?
There's plenty of opportunities to create consensus failures outside of that lib consensus too. So it's
like database and other things, or
sure,
yeah,
yeah, you name it. Just the maintaining the chain, going through the transactions, ordering of them, things like that.
Go ahead, last question.
Yeah, so my last question is on Bitcore, which is BitPay's Node.js stack on top of Bitcoin Core. I was just looking at the NPM downloads, and I think it's averaging $1,000 a week, pretty consistently for the past year. I personally know a lot of web apps that are building on top of Bitcore right now, and us personally, we had to actually switch to Satoshi Labs' fork because Bitcore was unmaintained, and it was there was some really bad stuff in it. I mean, SegWit wasn't put in it when we needed it. I'm not sure if it's there yet. So what are your thoughts on Bitcore, and what should we learn from the Bitcore experience? And should people build on top of Bitcore?
So if I'm not wrong, Bitcore had heavily patched Bitcoin Core with the indexes, and those indexes were hard to maintain, right? So I guess what I learned from that experience is don't put the index as a patch in Core, just build everything outside. And then you don't have to rebase, or it doesn't break.
So on my side, I think that so I would say Bitcore is deprecated. Maybe it's a strong word for some people, but when it doesn't get maintained and you have this sort of problem, I think it's time to move on and not doing the work for them. I think there is other tools that you can use. So for example, Trump Personal Server maybe. Also, you can take a look to NB Explorer. The one I did is very simple. It's like you run it, it's just track your HD. So it doesn't track the whole blockchain. So it's very easy to use.
LibBitcoin as well, right? It has all the...
Yeah, my recommendation is just use something that has a community around it, right? If there's just a company that basically runs it, and I don't know if this is really the case, but that they could decide to change gears. The community tends to last longer. I mean, LibBitcoin has had some amount of community around it since 2011, and it keeps getting bigger, which is nice to see. If I stopped working on it, I'm sure it would keep going. I mean, Amir founded it, and he stopped working on it for a long time, and I was working on it again.
On my side, actually, I have something to say. I think Bitcore was extremely well documented, especially when it was released. So that was a tool that a lot of newcomers would be encouraged to use compared to the state that the documentation was for even Bitcoin Core or the other tools. So quite a lot of people started to learn on that. But right now, yeah, I'm on Nicolas' opinion there. I would think it's deprecated, it doesn't follow the latest BIPs and stuff, so...
Bit-rotted, right? Bit-rotted.
Bit-rot, yeah.
Is this something that we should address? Because I agree that it's deprecated, or it might be considered, but still, I mean, presumably 50,000 developers have downloaded the NPM package.
Well, those 50,000 developers should take over ownership of it and run it. But if they're not, what does that tell you about what they're doing with it?
Well, one of them forked it, right? Satoshi Labs forked it and fixed some of the issues.
Yeah, but the NPM package is not Satoshi Labs' fork. But I mean, I'm talking about, for example, imagine a JavaScript web developer that's been tasked with generating addresses or something. He's just going to go with. So is this something that we need to focus on, or raise awareness of, or build alternatives to?
I think a very good thing, for example, that Ethereum did more than Bitcoin was great documentation. So I think the thing.
How would you know?
Because those JavaScript, I don't touch this. I just heard from third party. So, in Bitcoin, if you search Bitcoin JavaScript development, then you will find out documentation on Bitcore. So that's why they use Bitcore. And lots of developers like us are super busy writing tools, and we should take more time maybe documenting it. So when I created programming Bitcoin in C#, I actually used my own block explorer, but it was indexing everything and centralized. Now I don't advise it anymore, but I didn't change the book. And this is a failure on my part. I should rewrote it with the latest best practice I know. And it's how I think to having a clear documentation, that is easily Googleable, then you can change the standard. And I think, I should spend more time writing English and less time writing C# maybe.
Okay, I think that's a note for the end of this panel, because everybody wants to eat something.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to the panelists, especially for the last minute notice.